Okay, so this is a quick tutorial on how to create various types of drawable objects, collisions, anything like that that you would be using in Sollumz. So first things first is a simple YDR. In this case, we're going to Shift A, create a simple cube, and this cube is going to end up being our drawable object. Personal preference, I like to turn on cavity. That way we can easier preview, for example, if we inset the cube. So first things first, of course, go into Sollumz, drawable, create drawable object, convert to drawable. And this creates a simple drawable object. From there, you can just export CodeWalker and you'll have your own drawable object. But there's no materials on this object. Let's change that. There are hundreds of different types of materials, shaders that you can use. A lot of the times you're going to be sticking with default, normal spec, and regular spec. These you all use different sorts of materials. In this case, we're just going to use a simple default shader. Click create shader material. Make sure you have your material selected, otherwise it'll give you an error like it did to me. From there, you have your shader. However, there's no texture plugged into the shader, so it is just showing up black. Go to your shading workspace, and all of this you do not have to worry about. All you have to worry about for right now is this. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and find a simple texture to use. Once you have your material loaded up, like as do I, it can be any texture, just so long as it is following the power of 2. The power of 2 is 2 by 2 pixels, and just square that. So 2 squared is 4. 4 squared is 16. 16 squared, and so on and forth. As long as it's a power of 2. So 2 to the power of 3, 16, 2 to the power of 4, 32. Sort of like that. Once you have your material, you won't be using the surface or any of these. You'll be using the Sollumz tab. Texture parameter. This specified where your texture is on your actual computer. You have this embedded tag. If you click this, when you export your model, your texture will go along with it. If you have this unchecked, then you will have to create a texture dictionary, which is more optimized, but requires a slight amount more work. Usage, really, you don't have to mess with this. However, if you're embedding it, it's recommended that you change the usage to whatever it's being used for. For instance, this is a diffuse sampler, so it's a diffuse texture. If this was a bump sampler, you would change this to normal. And example. Now there's some things like diffuse dark, diffuse detail. You can use those how you see fit, but most of the time it's good to just stick with diffuse. Value parameters. Most of these you really do not touch, and you really should not touch. Wetness multiplier is used for example, when it rains, how wet will the texture be? 1 was normal. 0, it won't be wet. That's for example. Fragment is not applicable, as it says, because it's not a paint shader. Animation track. These are for UV transformations. For instance, let's say you create a translate. This allows you to scroll your texture in both directions. Really, you don't use this unless it's for a screen, for example, something you want to animate. But other than that, you don't really touch that. And that is your material. Now, if we were to export this cube right now, there would be no collision on it. That's because the collisions are not embedded. To embed your collision, when you create your drawable, you can check this tick right here. But if you already have your drawable, for instance, like I do right here, what you can do, you can Shift D to duplicate, Alt P, clear parent and keep transformation. This means you have a duplicate of your cube. Now, what you can do is you can just change this to collision V, convert to composite, or you can go into drawable, collision, create bounds, and click convert to composite. And it creates this. This hierarchy is your collision. Now, first thing when you create your collision mesh, make sure your collision mesh is selected. Remove your material. In the collision tab, there is a create collision material. From there, again, there's hundreds of different collision materials. Some of them have special properties. For example, physics. These have different physics properties. You have VFX. I'll apply a VFX metal electrified, just an example so you guys can see it. So basically, when you shoot this, it'll have an electrical effect. Flag presets. Click on your collision BVH, go to object properties, go to the Sollumz tab, and you'll see there is a lot of different material of settings. Good news for you, 99% of these get auto calculated when you export your collision, so you do not have to touch them. Shape, don't have to touch that. Flags, these are the main things you're going to be messing with. All of these affect different things. For instance, if I uncheck map weapon, then when you shoot it, the bullets will just go straight through. Map animal, you won't collide with it. The main one you'll be touching is map cover. That prevents you from being able to cover behind that. Additionally, if you look at your collision flags in your collision material, you can have not climbable, so you won't be able to climb up it. See-through, AI can see through it. Shoot through and shoot through effects, you can shoot through your material collision. None, which really don't need. Stairs. Stairs are a little bit different. We'll cover that later. No decal. It won't have a decal when you shoot through it. Not cover. AI will not cover behind it. And then all of these are fairly self-explanatory. Then you have the actual parent cube. Go to object properties. Most of these values, again, like the geometry BVH, will be calculated on export. So you don't have to worry about that. Now, you have your cube, you have your collision, but they are separate right now. What you want to do, select hierarchy, click on it, hold shift, click on it, make sure none of this is selected, and shift drag it underneath cube. What this does is now both your model and your collision are both parented to your drawable. So what this means is that when you export this, it will have collision in game and everything will work as intended. Now, LOD distances. These are if your collision, or not your collision, your drawable has embedded LODs. For instance, if I go to data, Sollumz LODs, you can see there's very high, high, medium, low, and very low. Very high and very low, you will rarely touch with a drawable, a .ydr file. Mainly, you will have a high and a medium. And how this works is, let's say you have your, hide the collision, show the model. Let's say you have a reduced version of your base model. I'll just create one right now really quickly. And you can see this one's a lot higher detail than this one. So what you can do, go to LOD tools. You can either reference your main mesh and generate, or if you remove this, you can have your media mesh. Go here, get this name. I would just rename it to med. Now you can set your medium to this. You can delete that. And now you can see when you switch between it, your LOD is now embedded. It's slightly confusing, but you'll get the hang of it. Now we can just rename this to test cube. Go into our model, our texture. We're just going to make sure it's embedded. Now we can go into archetype definition. And this creates your Y type. So just go ahead and create a new one, double click it to rename it. Now, yes, you can click add archetype and do everything manually, or you can let it Sollumz do it for you. So go auto create from selected, make sure this is set to base, auto create, and it sets everything up for you. Now, name, this is the name that when you put into your Y map will spawn it. Usually asset name and name are the exact same. Texture dictionary. If it's embedded, set it to the cube name. If you have a mix of embedded and unembedded textures, set this to your texture dictionary name. For example, underscore TXD, whatever it's named, just name it to that. But in our case, it is only embedded. And if this is empty, that means your collision is not embedded, which means you won't have collision. But since this is filled out, that means we do have collision. Extensions, this will be covered at a later date. Flags, there are a lot of flags. Most of them are unknown, so you won't be messing with them. But a few that you should know, static. This means it is not dynamic. It is stuck in place. Dynamic, if you run into it, you will collide with it and it will move dynamically. All these YCD flags. Bone animations is if you have, like, for instance, like a fan blade and it's spinning. UV animations is what I showed you with the animation tracks. If you had an animation, when you eventually set it up, you would check this flag when you create it. Invisible, but it blocks lights and shadows. It will only cast shadows. This is the opposite. It'll be there, but it will not cast shadows at all. Double-sided rendering. So let's say you had a flat plane. You'll only be able to see one side of it. Checking that, you will be able to see both sides of it, no matter the normal. Special attributes, for example, if you had a door, you could set a special attribute. For instance, 5 is for a garage door, 7 is for a pushable door. However, that requires additional setup. All these vertex channels are for your color attributes or vertex colors. So for instance, this is how you set up a color attribute, which is vertex colors. You name it color 1 or color 2, depending. Domain, face corner, data type, byte color. You can either leave it black and then change the color later, or if it's going to be one solid color, you can just set it here. For instance, we're just going to set ours 100% red. However, if you do not have your color attribute set up, you can just disable red vertex color and it will not glow at night. However, I recommend you do set up your color attribute and your vertex colors because it's just good practice. Speaking of vertex colors, if you go into solid view and you go into vertex paint, you can see that it is red. However, if we go into paint mask and do face select, go into edit mode, select these faces in here, go back, then you can see only this is selected, so to say. Now, if you like change this to green, for example, Shift K, or go to paint, set vertex colors, you'll see this is now selected. And just like that, your outside is black and your inside is green. And we'll see how this looks in game when we get to that. Now, if you go back into object mode, or if you go here, object mode, and we make sure our collision is on hid, and everything is set up in our white type, we can just go ahead and export. Click on this, B, export CodeWalker XML. Now we have a whole bunch of settings here. Include limit to select objects. For example, if you have a bunch of YDRs in your scene, but you're only trying to export a few and you're not trying to wait, click limit to select objects, and whatever the parent object you have selected, that will only be exported. Apply parent transformations. That's your choice. That'll just apply your transforms. Export with white type. Don't usually use this. It breaks your white type. Toggle LODs. Don't worry about that. That's for YFTs. Collisions. This is where I said it will auto calculate everything. Just leave it. Don't have to worry about that, and don't have to worry about that. So just go ahead and export it, and everything works. It says exported in 0.151 seconds. Now go ahead and fire up your CodeWalker. If you just go ahead, take these two, drag it in. There is our prop. And you can see, if I just open up here, we have our high detail, we have our medium detail. Now you can see our medium detail is painted 100% white, so it glows. It's always bright. Our high detail, however, painted red, it will adapt to how dark it is. Our inside, that is green, will always have some sort of artificial illumination. Now, very rarely will you do this. However, you can go click this little circle right here and it'll enter the material editor. So this just lets you edit your materials in CodeWalker. If you need to make like a quick change, texture editor. If you have an embedded texture and for some reason, I don't want to go into Blender and change it. Just want to change it here. You can remove, replace, add. You can do that. Lights. I recommend you do lights in Blender. However, if you do add a light, you can go into, you can edit and add lights in CodeWalker. And you can see just how bright this is. So if I lower the intensity to 1, I change the fall off to You see the fall off. Inner and outer angles mainly for spotlight, so you won't really touch that. You have time flags. So each one of these checkboxes, the light will be on for this, whatever hour this is. So for instance, it turns off at 7 and then it turns back on at 2100. If you had an animation and you had bones, you can link this to bone IDs and then the light will follow the animation. Flags is why I recommend you do it in Blender, because if I just create a light and I go into the Sollumz panel, the flags, all of them that are known, are here. Now they are shortened, so sunlight. The main ones you'll be touching are electric. This has an electric hum to it. Volume, this enables the volume panel right here. Spec off, the light will not affect the specular. The light off, the light will be turned off. And most of these, I don't know what they do either. So for instance, I want it to be electric and have a volume. So I'm going to check these, copy these flags, delete that cube because you don't need it. And then you can just change the flag here. Now for volume color, you can just set that to white, volume intensity to 1, volume scale 1, outer exponent 1. You can leave these to 0, all of these to 0. And there you go. Now, any edits you make in terms of this, you can just press the save button. As long as you're in edit mode in Sollumz, your changes will be saved. For instance, if I go back here and I make it night, there you go. Our changes have been applied. Now, I'm going to show you how to put this in game. This tutorial is primarily for 5M. So if I go here, create a test folder. First things first, create a new folder inside that, call that stream. Drag these two in here. Then you create a new text document. Call this FX manifest. Next, we're going to create an FX manifest. So right click, new text document. Just open that up. So this is going to be all right. So next, you're going to create an FX manifest. You're going to right click, new text document. And I'm going to have this paste in the description. You're going to call this FX manifest.lua. And it should change. If it doesn't, go into view, file name extensions, and then it will change into a .lua file. From there, you can just paste this in. I'll also have this in the description. FX version, Brilliant, game, GTA 5. This is a map. Yes. Save that. Exit out of that. And boom. This is your 5M resource. However, if you were to open this up, your cube would still not be anywhere. To fix that, we're going to go ahead and open up CodeWalker. Once your CodeWalker has fully loaded up, we can go to open folder, navigate to your 5M resource, open selected folder, and you'll see that your YDR and YTYP should be loaded. Everything looks good in here. Now, let's navigate to a spot where we are going to place it. For instance, I am going to place it right here. So if you go right here, click the new button, it'll create a map1.wa map. Just change the name of that to whatever you want it to be. Go to YMap, new entity, archetype. Change this to from there. After you renamed it, we got YMap, new entity, archetype. This is that name and asset name. Just make sure they're both set the same. And if everything went good, that is your cube. We just changed it to night. Your light should be in there. Your prop should be there. And everything should be good. Now, there are a few more YMap flags that you can also look at. Mirror proxy, you don't have to worry about that. Same with reflection proxy. Disable water reflections. Your object will not be reflected in water. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about that. Only cast shadows. Your object will only cast shadows. Don't cast shadows. Your object will not cast shadows. If your prop has archetype extension, for instance, a scenario where an object, ped is sitting in your chair, for example, if you have a custom chair, click that, and that will no longer happen. Disable YDR lights does what the name says. The light you created will be disabled. Object isn't dark at night. Your object will glow. Not glow as in an emissive texture, but will glow as in it will not get dark. Static entity is what I have selected, and that means the entity will not move. Disable embedded collision. The embedded collision you created, you can just walk straight through. Lastly, allow full rotation. If you did not have this selected and you only had that selected, A, your object will be dynamic, and B, it will allow your object to fully rotate on its axis. But in my case, I'm just going to leave this as a static entity. I'm going to set the LOD level to HD. That means that, for instance, if I go into max LOD, I just change it to that. If I go into HD, it removes all of the minor props and stuff. It's only the major defining features. Then if I go to LOD, this changes everything to a lower LOD, SLOD, and so on and so forth. In this case, HD or Orphan HD work perfectly fine. Next, if I go back up, we can test our LOD. You see how it stays high LOD for a long distance. This is because our LOD distance is set really high. If we change this to 15, for example, then if I back up and I save, let's go ahead and save my YMap. I don't know why it's not doing it, but in game, it should switch between LOD distances. Also, in your test cube, make sure your LOD distance is set to 60 and your HD is set to whatever your LOD distance is. So 15. Now go ahead and file, save as, replace, file, save. You can just save that. Tools, always generate your manifest. This just defines what is where, and it loads your YMap and YType. So generate, save, and save. Now your file should be 5 and ready. All right, now that we're in game, you can obviously see that your prop should have worked. And now that we're standing on it, you can hear that it does have collision. So if I just go ahead and give myself a weapon, and we shoot it, since we gave it that VFX material, it has that electrical effect and smoke, which I think is pretty cool. Additionally, if we just change the time, we can now see that our volume is working. Second, it only activates from certain times. So for instance, if we set our time to 6:55, see that it is working. If we set it to 8, it is no longer working. But if we go back to, I believe it was 2100, it is back to working. Just like that, we can see it turn on. Additionally, if you can hear it, you can hear the electrical effect in action. That's how you create a standard YDR.